Thank you. Thank you very much. I tell you, it's wonderful to be here in your church and to talk about the subject of marriage, because I'm qualified to speak on marriage, because I've been married a long time to a lovely lady, and she could have left me a long time ago if she hadn't been a lovely lady. And I believe I'm qualified because the first 11 years of my marriage was BC, before Jesus, before Christ, before conversion, before change in my life. My wife lived with me 11 years before Jesus was my Savior. These last many years have been precious. January the 18th, 1947, I responded with an I do to this kind of a thing. Listen to me. Will you, Bob Harrington, take Joyce Compton to be your lawful wedded wife, to live together after the ceremony in the holy state of matrimony? And will you love her, honor her, and keep her in sickness or in health, in poverty or in wealth, for better or for worse? And will you keep thee only unto her as long as ye both shall live, so help you God? And I said to that, I do. Have you ever said an I do to that statement? Did you really mean it? When the time comes for you to say I do to that, will you really mean it? I think today man's word needs to be upgraded. When you say things today, I think it's important to remember what you've said and to whom you said what you did. A man's word used to be his bond. Nowadays, a man's word is not even taken by those that work with him and love him like a man's word ought to be. I want all you young people to listen to Bob Harrington tonight like you've never listened to a preacher before, because your marriage in the future could be better because of what you do in the present by getting your past forgiven and your future in the hands of the Lord. Now, we're going to talk about a thing called marriage, and we're going to discuss these different aspects of marriage. Are you old enough? Now, that doesn't have anything to do about 18, 19, 20, 30, 40. Are you old enough to be married? Are you old enough to say I do? All right, we'll talk about that. Then we're going to discuss how to be happily married. We're going to choose the fact that making the right mate your decision. If you've already married and you think you got the wrong mate, we're going to talk about how to repair that man instead of replace him, and how to repair that woman instead of replace her. Seemingly today, if you don't like one another, you don't try to repair it, you just try to remove it by replacing it. And seemingly sometimes you bring in a bigger problem than you got rid of when you moved the other one out. So we want to talk tonight also about, is your marriage on the rocks or is your marriage on the rock? We'll talk about those things tonight. Now listen to me right now as I take my Bible. That's a good book to take when it comes to marriage, because this is where marriage came from. Marriage was ordained of God in heaven, and not in Las Vegas, and not in Hollywood, and not on national television, and not with the newspapers of the Dear Abby or the Ann Landers or the Joyce Brothers or the Margaret Meads. Marriage was ordained in heaven of God, by God, that marriage might be holy. Say that word, holy. Say it again, holy. Most marriages I know today are hellish because they are not based on holiness. Marriage should be a holy state, so saith the Lord. When Paul was writing to the church at Corinth, they were having a lot of marriage problems in those days, just like we're having today. 25% of all marriages today are second marriages, because nearly 50% of all first marriages end in divorce. I wonder why. I think today America needs preaching about marriage more than any other subject other than salvation. Instead of thinking about the heaven we go into and the sweet by and by, we ought to have a good marriage in the nasty now, so that our kids can identify with a home instead of a house, and a marriage that's holy instead of hellish. How many glad you've come so far? Raise your hand, let's see. We vote quite often. We got some couples in here tonight that are married and just here to see if this message is going to help them. Well, it's going to help you because it's going to help me. Paul wrote to the group at Corinth, and he said over at the 8th verse of that 13th chapter of 1 Corinthians, charity never faileth. That's love. That's love. Say that word, love. Love. Love never faileth. I tell you, if most of our marriages today had more love in them, they wouldn't be failing. See, God doesn't ordain a marriage to be a flop. The reason a marriage is a flop, you leave love out. You put your personality in instead of God's personality in your love. God doesn't ordain a marriage or church or business to be a flop. The reason most of us are flop today is we are in a floppy condition instead of a godly condition. Love never faileth, but whether there be prophecy, they shall fail. Whether there be tongues, they shall cease. Whether there be knowledge, it shall vanish away. For we know in part, and we prophesy in part. But when that which is perfect is come, then that which is in part shall be done away. When I was a child, I spake as a child. I understood as a child. I thought as a child. But when I became a man, I put away childish things. Listen to that. But when I became a man, I put away childish things. If you want to know the base of most marriage failures today, one or the other, the man or the woman, is still a child. Now, there might be a 40-year-old child, a gray-headed child, might be a beautiful woman child, but Paul said when you grow up, you're supposed to put away childish things. Look what he said, for now we see through a glass darkly, but then face to face. Now I know in part, but then shall I know even as also I am known. And now abideth faith, hope, charity, that's love, these three, but the greatest of these is love. Now let me talk to you a little bit about some stages of love that people grow through in this thing called life. Because stages of love are very, very good and very, very wonderful. Because you see, ladies and gentlemen, everything God made beautiful in its place, in its place. But there are some things that you might think are beautiful that are not in the right place, and they turn out to be ugly. And becoming a man is an important thing after you have left your childish ways. You're supposed to leave those. So let's look and see, if you please, for the next few moments about the different stages of love that people grow through. Now, the first stage, and when I talk about are you old enough, I'm not talking about 18, 19, 20. I'm talking about are you old enough to know what it means to be married. And when do you become old enough? When you put away childish things and you realize that you're a man and realize that you're a woman so ordained of God to be married. Now, let's talk about the first stage of love people go through. I went through it. Thank God I got through it. I was about 35 years old before I did, I guess. But the first stage of love is baby love, self-love. Because the first person a baby loves is not its mama. People say, oh, that baby loves its mama. No, that baby doesn't love its mama. That baby loves that baby. That baby's in love with that baby. If you don't believe that baby loves that baby, you wait and see when that baby's going to squall most for food and water. It's always going to be at 1 o'clock a.m., 2 o'clock a.m., and if that baby loved mama, he could hang in that crib till 8 o'clock a.m. But that baby loves the baby. That baby has the philosophy that most young couples have today. I want what I want when I want it. And if I can't get it, I'll squall to high heaven. That's the way most marriages mess up today. Either the bride or the groom, the woman or the man, have that baby self-love philosophy. I want what I want when I want it, and if I can't get it, I'll go home to my mama. I think it's about time for people, when you say I do to one another, you're supposed to say I don't to your childish way of living. That child love, that baby love, that self-love, it's flaked out many a marriage. And you know as well as I do, when you stand up in front of a preacher and you take one another for better, for worse, remember that when the worst comes along. It's amazing how well they enjoy the better, but let a little worse come, and they want to split, they want to call it off, they want to blame the marriage on everything, and they are not man enough or woman enough to be what they ought to be. But when you say I do to one another, you're supposed to drop your diapers and stand up like a man, because you're no longer a baby. You need to cut that umbilical cord and stand on your own 2 feet and not on mamas and daddies and uncles and aunts and neighbors. When you say I do to one another and a little trouble comes along, have enough fortitude and guts to face the situation and correct it, and don't run from it back to mama and run from it back to daddy or run from it down to a lawyer or to a psychiatrist. Just get over that I want what I want when I want it philosophy and grow up and put away childish things. How many believe this kind of preaching? Raise your hand. Let's see. I'll guarantee it's the truth. Some of you probably still married to a baby. She might be a 40-year-old baby, but she squalls just like a baby. Now, this time is needed in America today for people to grow up. America needs some men. When a man says I do to a woman, he's a man. Now, he may not shave 3 times a day, but he's a man. If you're not a man, you ought not say I do. I stand amazed how so many people say, well, when I finish high school and 2 years of college, I'll be old enough to get married. You're not old enough till you grow up. You say, well, I got hair on my chest. Big deal. Some of the biggest babies I know are these hairy monkeys running around acting like they're men. I tell you how you prove you're a man is when you grow up and you put away childish things. Now, let me give you the second stage of love that people normally grow through. Now, these exciting stages, they're exciting if you grow through them. but they sure are a mess if you don't ever get through them. Second stage is parent love. It doesn't really matter whether your parents are good parents or bad parents. When you say I do to that woman, you're not married to your mom and daddy. You're married to that woman. When you say I do to that man, you have divorced yourself from mother and daddy. You have a parent love for them, but you don't have a husband-wife love for them because you're not married to daddy or mother. You're married to that man or that woman. Many a marriage today is all messed up when a boy can't get away from the mama image and the wife can't get away from the daddy image. She's trying to make her husband like a daddy, and the wife's trying to make her husband like her daddy, and the husband trying to make his wife like her mama. Man, one time my wife was cooking something, and she said, "Is this like your mama used to cook?" I said, "No, thank God it's not. I don't stop at any restaurant that says home-cooked food like mama used to cook. My mama couldn't even open cans real well. So I sure didn't get married to my mama. I married Joyce, and I never tried to compare her with my mother, because when I said I do to her, I put my love to that wife like God say you're supposed to do, and your love to that husband like you're supposed to do, and leave off that parent love. Now, you can have some of the sweetest mamas and sweetest daddies in the world, but they've got their place, and you've got your place, and their place is not your place. And when mom and daddy come to visit you, you check that suitcase and be sure it's just a weekend bag. Mama pulls up with a trunk. You lock that front door and run out that back door, because you're not married to mama. Let her go home to papa and worry him some more. He's probably the one that said, "Go visit the children, honey. Stay long." Let me tell you, that parent love is beautiful in its place. But when you leave that place, you leave that love. That doesn't mean you don't love your mom and daddy, but you're not married to your mom and daddy. You're married to that woman or to that man. Let me give you the third stage. This third stage is where a lot of it's at. That's called that gang love stage. Now, it's nothing sweeter than to be around a bunch of kids in Sunday school and church and see the little 8-year-old, 9-year-old boys. I like boys, they say. I'd rather sit with the boys. You're not going to put me by a girl. I only like to sit by girls. I might like to pull the hair and run, but I want to sit with them. I just don't like girls. Now, that's cute, isn't it? That's cute. But when they get 30 years old and rather be with the boys, that's ugly. That's ugly. I think that's what's wrong with a lot of our men today that are married. They're not men enough to face the responsibility as a husband and a daddy. They'd rather be out on the golf course Sunday morning, rather be down at the VFW club on a Saturday night, not with the wife, but with the men. I think that's one of the damning sins in marriages today, is men get more excited with the boys than they do with his wife, and there's something wrong when you get more excited out with the fellas than you do at home with your wife and your children like you ought to. Now, this doesn't mean I'm trying to discount the fact that you're not a real man, that you haven't grown up. I'm not talking about all these he's and she's and shims that we're developing in America today. I'm not talking about all these misters and misses and mistakes. And it's terribly embarrassing on me, like riding out here the other day to the church here in town. I was pulling up behind a car and had this long-haired creature in front of me, and I thought, "Isn't that pretty? I'm going to blow my horn when I go by." And just as I got near it, I was going to give my horn a little toot, and it turned around, and she had a mustache all over her face. I said, "Oh, boy, I want to thank the Lord I didn't blow my horn, because if I had, he might have liked it." Lord, you have to watch out nowadays. We got so many female impersonators on Bourbon Street, they have to wear tags to keep them hustling one another. I tell you, it's something else. We need to grow up in this situation we're living in today. Now, today we seem to condone this perversion where the boys, if I like boys, leave me alone. I must be with the boys. God ordained when you grow up, you put away your childish gang love stage. It's just as upsetting for a housewife to rather be down at the bridge club with the women, or out at the garden club with the women, or down at the missionary union with the women, or prayer meeting with the women, and many times they ought to be at home with that man, taking care of that man like they ought to, and if he'd use that energy at home making their marriage work instead of out with all the sisters and the husbands in town, then you'd grow up and get out of that gang love stage. Now, we got so many people today that are hung up in this gang love stage, and God done ordained you to stay in that love stage. I think that's the reason so many men belong to civic clubs, belong to social clubs, hunting clubs, goose, got loose, moose clubs. They belong to everything, VFW, American Legion, leftists, rightists, Masons, Shriners. You know why they don't want to stay home with the wife? Because the wife knows what he's like, so he'd rather go down to the club so they'll think, "Man, he top moose. He's top goose down here. He's Mr. Big in our club. Let me tell you something. If you're not the man you ought to be at home, I don't care how big you are in your civic club, you are a failure as a man. If you're not the man you ought to be in your marriage, because that's where it's at, Junior. That's where it's at. You go down and pick up somebody's tab at the bar. You can go down and buy somebody a steak, and they'll say, you sure are nice. No, you're not all that nice. It's those ticks and leeches and everything love that blood money you got, because that way they save their own because they can drain you dry. I'll tell you where you prove your manhood is when you're the man you ought to be in at home as a husband, as a daddy to those children, and as a husband to that woman you said I do to. How many like this kind of preaching? Raise your hand. Thank you, ladies. I appreciate your voting. This is where it's at. That's the reason Jesus Christ established a church. It can be a civic club where the husband and the wife and the children can come together as a family. You don't have to go your way as a man, and she doesn't have to go her way as a woman, and the kids don't have to go their way as children. The church is where the family of God ought to get together, and that way, that's where marriages are made holy. Let me give you another stage to grow through. Not only that self-love baby stage, not only that parent love stage, not only that gang love stage, but there's another stage called others love stage. Now let me tell you something, you guys, you gals, and some of you sharp looking, 17, 18, 19, some of you sharp 15, 14, have to turn around and look at the choir because some of the sharp ones in the choir. Now when you're 15, 16, 17, 18, you dating pretty heavy, and you got a blue book, a black book, and it's just got a stable full of numbers. That's fantastic. Man, that's where it ought to be. Just have them calling, you calling, just waving at them. You have to have an appointment secretary to line up your date bureau. That's beautiful. But when the time comes, you say, I do to that man, or I do to that woman. You say, I don't to the rest of the crowd. Because that others love stage is before you're married and not after you're married. Most people need to realize where that's at. In Hollywood that laughs at it, and Johnny Carson and the night talk show artist on television laugh at it because they've run through 2 or 3 wives looking for 4 or 5 more. Let me tell you, just because they laugh at it doesn't mean God smiles at it, because marriage is still supposed to be holy in the eyes of the beholder, and God is the one established holy matrimony. We need to recognize these stages of love. Here's another stage that you go through, and I hope and pray you'll end this stage, and that's God's ideal stage. And what's God's ideal stage? It's when you're old enough as a boy, old enough as a girl, to know God's plan for marriage is one man with one woman forever. When you get that old in your heart, that old in your action, then you're old enough to talk about marriage. But if you haven't grown through that I want what I want when I want it stage, you better not get married. If you haven't grown through that mother love and that daddy love stage, you better not get married. If you haven't grown through that gang love stage, you better not get married. Because when you're ready to say I do to that girl, you have to know how to say I don't to that gang. Because you're not married to that hunting club and that fishing club. You're not married to that club downtown. You're going to be married to that woman till death do us part. When you grow through those stages, you're old enough to be married. And if you haven't grown through them, you're not old enough, whether you're 40 years old or 18 years old. Now for the next few moments, let me talk about my next phase of this marriage ceremony. And that's the fact how to be happily married. You ready? How many want to know how to be happily married? Raise your hand, let's see. Thank you. Some of you wouldn't have voted if I'd held a gun on you, but that's all right. If you are happy already, there's another stage of happiness maybe I can tell you about. Now, when I read my Bible, I always like to see what God has to say. And I look in my Bible trying to find something to give me a base of operation for happy marriage. And I found in Philippians 4:8, where it talks so much about attitude. Say that word, attitude. Say it again, attitude. Many a man has lost his job because of a bad, sour, negative what? Attitude. Many marriages mess up because of what? Attitude. Many lives today don't ever succeed because of attitude. Now let me talk a little bit about 5 keys to happy marriage. First of all is the right mate. I think it's most important to be married to the right person. You say, well, I'm already married and I don't think he or she's the right mate. I'll get to that in just a minute. Don't leave them yet. Don't walk out on me during my message. You just hung together this long, wait a little while longer. But we're going to talk about you in a little while. But we got a lot of folks in this building not married yet. And I believe it's important to let God direct you in your date life so that if your date life develops into a love life, it can be a later married life. I believe God should be included in all these things. I don't believe any saved girl or saved boy will want to date somebody who doesn't believe in their Lord. I don't see how anybody could be happy on a date with someone who's an antichrist, an anti-believer. You say, well, I'm trying to get them converted. Well, get them converted first before you flip for them and fall in love, because you can never be happily married when you're unequally yoked with an unbeliever. Doesn't matter how it looks outside, it won't be right inside, because the yoke is supposed to be even and not an uneven yoke situation. This right mate situation, I remember not too long ago, Rhonda Joyce Harrington, our oldest daughter, and Mitzi Jane Harrington, our youngest daughter, we were having a family discussion, and marriage came up when they were just in their early teens. And I remember Rhonda was dating earlier than Mitzi, of course, because Rhonda's the older of the two. And I remember how one night we were discussing marriage for her future. She said, well, Daddy, I'm just 14 or 15 right now. You think we ought to be talking about it? I said, I believe so. Because a lot of marriages have messed up in the future because they fell in love at the age of 15 and thought they were in love and left God out of this love life. So I remember that night we were talking about, because she was getting really eager then for boys, pretty heavy, you know, like girls do, and thank God for it. I was so proud she'd already grown through that. I'd rather be in the girls stage. She'd already kicked the girls out. She'd got more excited over, she'd dropped the paper dolls and everything else, man. She was wanting to know. I remember that night I said, honey, God knows where there's a boy for you. She said, when is he going to tell me, Daddy? I remember how she responded. It excited me. Why, it's natural for you girls to want to get excited over boys. And don't say, well, my daughter's just going through that puppy love stage. You better pray she won't wind up with a dog like you have. You enjoy the fact that they're going through that puppy love stage. And thank God it may be real to the puppy, so take care of that puppy, or it might bite you back later in life. I remember that night I said to Rhonda, let's pray for God to take care of your boy. And I did, and I remember when she prayed, this prayer I can talk so much about right now, because not too long ago I saw Rhonda say I do and heard her say I do. As her father, I gave her in matrimony to a young man named Chuck Kelly. And I remember that night we prayed, and I finished my prayer, and I heard Rhonda pray a prayer like this. She said, Lord, you heard my daddy tell me that you got a boy somewhere for me, Lord. Now, Lord, my daddy says you know where he is. And I don't know yet, Lord. But, Lord, would you take care of him and help his mom and daddy to raise him up like my mom and daddy raising me up? And then when the time comes for us to meet and get together and fall in love, would you handle that too, Lord? I sure will thank you for it. Amen, she said.